trying to find the root, the origins of Brexit is relatively somewhat quite difficult. A lot of people would say, "Oh, it's 2012." A lot of people would, of course, point to the UKIP European parliamentary elections victory that made sort of Brexit inevitable. People would put to the sort of the rise of Nigel Farage. Post 28 post 2010 2012, again roundabout there roughly. But the reality is that in the Tory Party, the deep roots of Brexit have long been there, because it has always been an argument for this free market fundamentalism that we have seen versus, well, actually, we do kind of like regulations. We understand why we would need regulations. But that has been very, very much the Tory split. We don't want regulations. We want complete free market, run wild, baby. And that's always been there, always has been. But it was been very, very much a faction that has been sidelined, kept in very much the political wilderness. And it wasn't until William Hague came along and started to indulge these people, bringing these people into positions of power, letting them, shall we say, get some air, even long before Nigel Farage came on the scene, which in many ways Farage, shall we say, would reap the rewards of those seeds sown by some of these, well, very Eurosceptic Tories. And you're going to hear a lot of names you will have heard before on this. Because, interestingly enough, Dennis McShay, he has written a diary of his time when he was a Labour MP. Yes, I know, caught up in the expenses scandal, etc., etc. I know. But there's a couple of things in his diary here where he really points out the extent of the Euroscepticism. That, to be honest, if you were heard to say these things today, you wouldn't bat an eyelid at them. But remember, this is being said back in like 1999 and 2000. So it does go really to show you where the roots of all this Brexit stuff really came from. So we're going to have a look at some of these extracts from his diary, because I think they're very, very well worth going over, because yeah, you'll have heard a lot of this rhetoric before. And remember, this is from like 1999, 2000. But it would not be, you wouldn't bat an eyelid if it was said today in Parliament by someone like Jacob Rees-Mogg. So before we do go having a look at that, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, the One for Nation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. There's the YouTube thank you button. And of course, there's a Pody Club down below as well. So let's crack on into this then. So the first one comes from the 8th of June, 1999, where Dennis says, I went to the house of the then Prime Minister Tony Blair for his statement on the European Council meeting in Cologne last week. And on Europe, the Tories again got very passionate and warned the then Tory leader, William Hague, that his anti-European politics might bring him some short-term tactical advantage, but they were going to do damage in the medium and long term. So bear in mind, this is Tories standing up and saying to the then leader, if you indulge in this anti-European politics, this will do long-term damage. And yeah, I think, given that it was said in 1999, he was right. The only problem is he doesn't credit which Tory stood up and said that. I would love to know which Tory he was referring to in that point. He then jumps on to, pardon me, June 15th, 1999, where Bill Cash, what a surprise, I did say you would be hearing a lot of these familiar names, is in a very triumphalist mode, declaring that the new shadow cabinet, which contains out-and-out anti-European skeptics like Bernard Jenkin, Ian Duncan Smith, is a Eurosceptic, and he is immensely satisfied and smug and says that Hague has to break with the European People's Party. This is the federation of right-centre parties of which the Tories were aligned with, and at what and all at once go for a full renegotiation of all the treaties. Thus, Hague is now pandering to his Europhobic MPs and has created a monster that will drive the party further and further into a populist national position. Then, even more amazingly, Cash then announces that he is seeing Hague this afternoon to tell him this. So, as you can see, these people kept at the fringes of the party, not taken very seriously. But William Hague comes in, indulges these people, gives them prominent positions in shadow cabinet, and these people start to throw the weight around. So immediately they're like, right, we have to have a full renegotiation of all EU treaties. But that's not leaving the European Union. That's not Brexit at this moment in time. But it's something else, and you can see the transformation of what happened over time, of what it became. So it then jumps to the 24th of March 2000 to Caleb Colleague of the Winter, the British-German political weekend, and also former Chancellor Ken Clarke complained about Blair's lack of leadership on the euro. Ken really has the quote cheek, as his economic stewardship and the failure to stand up to the anti-Europeans has now left us with a culture of such relentless hostility on Europe that this issues that is now very difficult to move. So here you can see one of the things that also came in sort of from this Tory time, that after 1997, the Tories got very, very infighty. However, they started to adopt the term from the Republicans at this point of, Ronald Reagan's golden rule: thou shalt not attack a fellow conservative. And this is what eventually this became. This is what I think helped the Euroscepticism really flourish in the Conservative Party. The idea that Ken Clarke can't go after people in his party or criticize them or say anything about them for their stances on being like anti-European or anything like that. So you can once again see how this movement is allowed to grow and then flourish in the Conservative Party. So May the 3rd, 2000, he says that PMQ was very notable for the strength and the attack by the then Lib Dem leader, Charles Kennedy, on Hague. He called him a bigot more or less to his face. I wish to God that Blair had the same courage, but focus groups sit on his shoulder like a raven, telling him not to join in this condemnation. Again, I can't remember that back then. I wasn't, let's say in the year 2000, I wasn't paying very much attention to politics at that time. I'm sure someone else can fill us in at that point. May the 16th of 2000. I came across a very marvellous quote by Lord Salisbury back in 1886, explaining why the Irish cannot have home rule. He said, when you narrow it down, you will find what is called the self-government, but what is really government by a majority. It works admirably well when it is confined to people who are of the Teutonic race, but it does not work well when people of other races are called upon to join it. You couldn't have made it up. And just as is every very relevant approach to the Europe from today's successors to Lord Sainsbury, who ran the Conservative Party. So, yeah, I do agree. Kind of a bit, bizarre quote, but I do sort of agree. If you sort of put it in terms of the Euroscepticism, so if you call this Brexit, which is government by a majority works admirably well. Yeah, not really 100% sure I get that, but I see where he's coming from. I see why he used the quote, but yeah, bit of a dodgy quote, I will say that. On June 12th, on the year 2000, on the way back to the house, I popped into the New Statesman at Victoria to deliver an article to its then editor, Peter Welby. about how the Conservatives are now becoming much more like a standard right-wing European party. Wilby has now made and Staggers the most unreadable, and has, quote, no interest in the politics of Europe, so I don't know why I bother. In September of September 1st, 2000, an early write-up for an article to The Observer argues that Britain is a country where people and races and all faiths now commingle, and we are far much better and stronger as a result. But old Porthwaite, racism based on color is now morphing into xenophobic dislike of Europeans. When the Berlin Wall came down and dropped the all visa requirements on the East, on East Europeans, Rotterdam is full of Poles and Lithuanians. But since we do not have ID cards, we do not know who is in Britain. And as the son of the Pole, I cannot object. But the Tories and the xenophobic parties like UKIP are now making latter-day European racism into big political themes. So again, you can see where some of this comes from. June 24th, year 2000, launched by Andrew Gibson. Lunch with Andrew Grimson. Launch. He was the Daily Telegraph's correspondent in Berlin, and is now back to freelancing for The Spectator and Evening Standard. He is hostile to the euro and single currency, but basically to the idea of a greater partnership, power sharing, and participation in the European Union, trying to get a Tory Europhobe to let go of his article of faith is like hoping to convert a wee free to Catholicism. So, obviously, Andrew Gibson, again, big, pro Brexit writer, again, really hostile to the idea. Oh, we can't join the sort of the single currency. Everything else, sure, greater partnership, power sharing, participation, in the European Union, sure. Single. Oh no, not the euro. That again was the big moment a lot of people will point to, the referendum on the euro as again another big point to show sort of the growth in Euroscepticism, not only just in the Conservative Party, but also gave growth to UKIP as well. October 2nd, year 2000, I wrote a piece on Paul Sykes, the South Yorkshire property developer who is offering over 20 million to the Conservative parties if they will come out against Europe. I'm trying to stir the nest a little, but as usual, I get completely snubbed by frosty indifference from the newspapers and to get the editors to commit. So I didn't know this either. I didn't know who this guy was until I saw this, but this was actually a thing that happened. You had a very big property developer who went, I will give this money to the Tories if you say you come out against Europe. So now you can see the money that's slowly starting to flow around because, well, if the Tories aren't going to say that, who do you think this guy eventually gave money to? It's pretty obvious who he eventually gave that money to and who benefited from that. Jump to October 9th. I bump into Andy Marr, the then political editor at BBC News, on the tube, who says that Hague is now much more frantically right-wing. He's now anti-abortion, pro-capital punishment, and even more pro-birching than people realize. Hague is completely with Anne Widdecombe in a ludicrous lurch to the right. So bear in mind, this is the year 2000. This is the year 2000, and yet, once again, it is Hague who is starting very slowly and cautiously this lurch to the right, which we would see from these Brexiteers. So it was always there. It was just the question of who was in power, how much political clout they were getting at that time, and how much oxygen, shall we say, to the debate they would eventually get. So October 16th, year 2000. This day was entirely devoted to the 6-monthly debate on Europe before the EU Council. It was a collector's item. Ken Clarke made a speech comprehensively trashing the hysterical opposition to the Conservatives to the European Rapid Reaction Force. This, in real terms, is quite a modest military proposal, which leaves NATO firmly in the driving seat. But the anti-European press And this is where this comes from, by the way. You remember the whole European army, this is where it started. But the entire anti-European press has gone bananas on it, saying that it is a European army and it will undermine NATO and destroy the Atlantic Alliance. Complete tosh. And Clark, without being insulting or being aggressive, demolished the position of William Hague in a parliamentary tour de force. Then it was the turn of Sir Peter Emery. He'd been an MP for 41 years, a knight of the Devonshires. He lamented that the Conservative Party of Churchill and Harold Macmillan, who he had quoted effectively about the need to pool sovereignty. He would then obviously been disappeared to be replaced by the present anti-European mob. So this is the other thing that a lot of people don't realize, that these anti-Europeans looked strategically as to who they could get rid of and who they could force out of the party and get rid of them. So when Boris Johnson removed the whip from a ton of pro-European conservatives, there was a lot of precedent for that at the time, for these, these, should we say, these we call them the proto-Brexiteers, because this is, year 2000. This is really what they were, or what eventually, they would become. Again, shows you just the change about this has happened. So you have the whole NATO thing, and then the whole idea that you have a guy who's like, look, Churchill, Harold Macmillan, the need for pooled sovereignty, the importance of it, why the Conservative Party was so for, at one point, really, really pro-European. Now, again, completely 180 degrees. And that was only in the year 2000. That was really not that too long ago. 5th of December 2000. I then had lunch with Tom Baldwin of The Times and The Guardian's Patrick Winter at Sir James Hotel. We're then joined by Bob Seamley, who is in the media as a special advisor to Francis Maude, the shadow foreign secretary. Maude is becoming a very chirping cricket on Europe, and as a result is taken less and less seriously. The bottom line is that the Tory position of saying, quote, no to everything from Europe is flatly ridiculous. Seen as a really nice and intelligent to talk to, I would like Maude too. He seems somewhat decent, thoughtful, and a great political pedigree. But why on earth are they in the cul-de-sac of politics? William Hague's decision to turn the Tories into an anti-European party has no idea otherwise how to lay a finger on Blair. This will damage UK politics. And that was in the 5th of December 2000. This whole idea of saying no didn't really work out for Norway and Sweden. Not Norway and Sweden. Norway and Switzerland, sorry. They originally, of course, did not agree to join a lot of the stuff with Europe and kept on saying no. But eventually they were like, well, hold on a second. By saying no, we are damaging our economy. We're limiting our chances. We can see actually, the EU is becoming quite an effective sort of force. We should probably, maybe we don't want to be part of it fully, but at least we want to be, part of it in many ways. I can see the UK going the same way eventually, before probably fully rejoining at some point down the line. And I've said that before. But it does go to show you once again the development and where Brexit really comes from. Because by this point, as you can see, William Hague has come in. He doesn't know how to attack Blair. He's now relying on this anti-European stance, and he's allowing these Brexiteers into positions of power. This is now starting to poison the well for the Tory party and their position on Europe. So, December 11th, 2000, Blair and Robin Cook return triumphantly to the Commons from the EU Nice summit. As Blair gets up to speak, Cook, then the Foreign Secretary, never stops chattering in his ear, as Hague makes a bigger and bigger hash of his reply. Were I Blair, I would be irritated. I would be very irritated. But Cook is too good and professional to be disposed of. Hague is, well, there is only one good word: pathetic. On his best terrain in the front of the dispatch box, and on his best issue, Europe, he should at least have landed a blow. But He is shrill. He makes no jokes. He goes on and on about a qualified majority voting, which means that nothing to nobody. He is then has no positive image to actually offer. Blair, by contrast, is passionate. He then lays into Hague. He asks him if he wants a referendum on whether the pensions of officials of the Court of Auditors should be determined by a qualified majority of voting or not. It is debating a point, but then the House of Commons is about debates, and Hague shrinks into a very horrible hole that he wished he could just go away. It is not a very nice sight to see see a ruthlessly crushing of an opposition, but Hague and the anti-Europeans he now allows to run the Conservative Party despite everything that they will get. Will it make them think again? I doubt it. January the 18th, 2001. Blair has made very clear that there will be no possibility of replacing the pound with the euro without it being approved in a referendum. I've spent 4 years at the FCO and never once heard Robin or any other foreign office minister or anyone Downing Street who shapes EU policy ever mention holding a referendum. Making the pro-EU case has been very subcontracted to Britain in Europe, set up in 1999 on an all-party basis. Like the European movement, it is a worthy outfit, but William Hague has turned the Tories into a full-blown anti-European party. February 12th, 2001. I spot a little opening in the defence question on the European defence and to get the French embassy to send me over the text of what President Jacques Chirac would say about a Shaw's Franco-British summit last Friday. He said that the European defence could only be made in a complete harmony with NATO. I'd later drafted a letter to Ian Duncan Smith extremely nicely, but fancifully, the European hating shadow defense spokesman, in which I said he would go to Washington, as he plans to this week, to use domestic political affairs to try and carry out a party fight on foreign soil. The Tories are quite trying to shamelessly seeing their party advantage of their anti-European ideology, but as the desire for all the foreign aid now come jumbling together, in the chamber, I read out a bit of the sentence in French, quoting Chirac, and then went on to attack Duncan Smith, saying that it was disgrace that he was going to go to Washington in order to tell lies. At the moment, the word, quote, lies, the Tories started screaming and shouting at me. The speaker, of course, said the minister did not have to answer the question, but I made my point. So here's the thing, the whole continuing furore about the EU army. Oh, it's going to undermine NATO. Oh, it's going to undermine NATO. We never actually hear how it's going to undermine NATO, but that is always and would be even right up to 2016 the idea of a European army going to undermine NATO. How is it going to undermine NATO? The other, of course, big one. Oh, we'll bring in conscription. If we join this, then we're all going to get conscripted into a European army. By this point in 2001, I do believe at this point conscription was very much either phased out or was very well on its way out by this point. So, but still at this point, bear in mind, 2001, there's still no European army. It was just a big drummed up talking point. But now, probably more than ever, probably proved, well, actually, European Rapid Response Force might not actually be a bad idea. March 8th, 2001. I got at the end of the business questions to have a pop at William Hague, handling over his disgusting speech in Harrogate last Sunday, in which he said that if Labour won the election, Britain would become, quote, a foreign land because we would become closer to Europe. Again, very similar rhetoric, isn't it? They called it a very crass example of xenophobia and got a mini cheer from our side, though the chamber was pretty much empty with catcalls from the Tories. Jumping to April 30th, 2021. Lunch with author and historian Tim Anthony Ash. He's one of the most intelligent people to actually talk to on Europe. Tim said to me that he thought there was no question of Britain ever going into the euro within the next parliament. It will be a Conservative Prime Minister who would lead us into the euro, he said. Again, Just goes to show you at the time what the feeling of who was like the pro-European party. At the time, it was considered to be the Conservatives. That, of course, now changed, and it could change again. It could very, very easily change again. May 2nd, 2001. I bump into Peter Mandelson in the lobby who says, quote, I fear we're going to go backwards on Europe. He's right. I keep worrying that Blair is his second term would not be a brave radical leader that says Hugo Young of The Guardian wants. Instead, he wants to be very safety first. Let's win the third term. Let's take no risks. Let's be inward looking. Let's not ask people of Britain to take brave decisions. This was all simply my instinct. But if you look at the people who surrounded Blair, he appointed to the cabinet, they are very much all of the same mold. So, obviously, making the point at that moment, we shouldn't be really bold. We need to be safety first. Let's win, then let's do stuff. Again, a very similar position someone else happens to be taking at the moment. The last one, May the 9th, 2001. I come into Prime Minister's question times of the last time of this current parliament. Hague is, of course, deeply boring. He goes on and on and on about Europe, but it doesn't resonate. But the best moment is when Edward Heath gets up to make a personal statement. It is dripping with venom against Hague and is a final plea for engagement in Europe. When he sat down, we all burst into applause. That is to say, Labour, the Lib Dem MPs all clapped. Tony Blair even slapped the side of his. I haven't seen Tony Blair slap the side of his thigh since. I am very supportive of a prime minister, but mustn't clap in front of the dispatch box. But the entire parliamentary Conservative Party sat in a very hate-filled silence. It was a massive embarrassment because they knew that Heath was right. If they hadn't been able to make, they all hadn't been able to make their peace with that very ridiculed since they got rid of Thatcher. So, yeah, you can very clearly see points through the William Hague years of 1999 to 2001 where there are very clear moments of the proto-Brexiteers, of what they would become. You see the stances that they would later on to take, of the fact that, well, we don't want in the euro, but actually everything else is pretty fine. Amazing, once again, how that stance completely shifted to where we ended up. So again, it's interesting and just a fascinating look back, I think, into sort of Brexit history. And yes, I know Dennis McShane, expensive scandal, etc. I know, I get it. But I do think those extracts do go to show you the development of Brexit, where it came from, and that William Hague probably more responsible for advancing and giving breathing room for these Brexiteers to come in, for Nigel Farage to come in from the outside to start attacking, because, well, as you was seeing there in those extracts, Hague's attacks on Europe aren't breaking through. They aren't, making making any money. They aren't making hay. They aren't bringing anyone to the Conservative side. It's after this. It's after this point when Nigel Farage comes in after that election and sort of picks up where William Hague left off in many respects to that. And as you said, that South Yorkshire property developer, where do you think he gave his money to? And bear in mind, if you've got people like that who can drop this amount of money, this is why I said, the Green Party can become like the version of UKIP. Well, first of all, UKIP was very much a single issue party, and it was that single issue that they campaigned on. The other thing was that they had the money to spend. If you've got a property developer that's willing to drop like £20,000 a year, then UKIP can, and as they did, just run in pretty much every single election they want, nationally, locally, European elections, Doesn't even matter if they win, because they've got bags of cash behind them, and they've got people more than willing to feed that. So once again, it's why I say that the Green Party becoming a version of UKIP is impossible, because it hasn't got those resources behind it. Really does not have those resources behind it, and it's not really a single issue party. Even if you would say, oh, but what about the environmentalists, etc.? There's a lot of disagreement with the Tory Party, the Green Party, about those different environmental issues. As we said, look at HS2, development of rails and trains. They are the only Green Party in Europe to be against high-speed rail. Well worth pointing that out. But as always, yeah, interesting. I think an interesting dip into the past. But yeah, let me know what you think about this, because I thought those dire extracts were quite interesting, and in many ways, again, proto Brexiteers. And I think William Hague bears more responsibility for birthing Brexit into the Tory Party than I think anyone else, because he was the one who started that slide into the party becoming anti-European. So, as always, thank you very much for watching, and of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.